Welcome to Conversations on Food Justice, a series co-hosted by Food and Society at the Aspen Institute and Share Our Strength. I'm Corby Comer, Executive Director of Food and Society. Today, we're excited to discuss food insecurity on college campuses, subject we've been watching for a long time and only with increasing concern. The skyrocketing cost of a college education, coupled with inflation and insufficient student aid packages that often exclude funds for living expenses, are contributing to a rampant hunger crisis on campuses, a crisis that's far too little known. Our five extraordinary speakers will examine how food insecurity has become embedded in college campuses across the country and the ways communities are organizing to fight back against hunger and to find innovative ways to keep students in school. All our panelists share a passion for food justice and food security. We have with us today Anna Bowden, LSU Campus Life Program Assistant and Chair of the LSU Food Pantry Board of Directors, Jamie Hansen, Executive Director, Swipe Out Hunger, Radha Mathia, CEO, Capital Area Food Bank, Dr. Jessica Owens-Young, Assistant Professor, Department of Health Studies at American University. And we're excited to have Johanna Elsamore, the Manager of Media and Public Affairs at Share Our Strength, as our moderator. Quick housekeeping note. We'll address questions posted in the Q&A, so please submit your questions early and often using the Q&A button. If you'd like to use closed captions, click the captions button on your Zoom menu. Also, please join our post-session fireside chat with my wonderful co-host, Elliot Gaskins. You'll be hearing from him at the end of our great panel today, Dr. Owens-Young and Katie Workman. We'll have a 3-minute break after our panel. All you have to do is stay on this Zoom. Johanna, I give you and our wonderful panelists the floor, everyone we see on our screen.
Thank you so much, Corby. I'm honored to be a part of this conversation today and just thrilled to be joined by this wonderful panel. We have so much to cover. I really just want to dive right in if that's okay. So I'm going to start by throwing out a framing question. I'm going to start with Radha, and I think this gets at kind of looking at the framing of the issue. Over the past 3 years, and particularly at the height of the pandemic, food insecurity has really been top of mind for so many Americans. But food insecurity on colleges, campuses is still largely under-recognized. We don't hear about it as much. And as a result, it's under-addressed. Why do we think that might be?
Great. Thanks so much, Johanna, and thank you for having me on this panel. I think there are a few reasons why food insecurity on college campuses doesn't always rise to top of mind for most community members, if you will, across the country. The first reason is really just the changing profile of who that college student is. We might, a picture that might come to mind when you think about a college student is a more traditional one, which is someone, between the ages of 18 and 23, someone who is dependent financially still on their parents, presumably, who are supporting them for college, and someone who, is thinking about this as the next natural step, if you will, in their life cycle. But too often now, the case is that isn't the profile of your typical college student. Now, the college student is often an adult, someone who is, 20 plus years, anywhere to 40 or 50 years of age, who's the college student, who is often financially independent, may actually have dependents of their own that they're supporting, and is also holding down a job, and sometimes two. So the whole profile of who is that college student, I think, has changed. And given that you have individuals who are trying to maintain lives, families, cost of living, things like that factor in that can have them become more food insecure. The other thing I would say here is that for the first time in a long time, we have more first-generation students who are entering college, and that's fantastic. I think all of us are excited about the diversity and richness and ideas that come from having this, different individuals, if you will, be part of the classroom setting. But what comes with that is the inability to address things like housing and food and other living costs well beyond just tuition. And so those are a couple of the reasons why food insecurity may not immediately rise to the top of people's mind, but it's very much an issue across college campuses around the nation.
May I jump in to add?
Absolutely, Jess.
Yeah, so as Rada was talking about, when we think about the face of hunger, I think as a nation, as a culture, we have an image in mind of what hunger looks like, and it doesn't fully capture what we see in our college students and even in society more generally. And I think that image really prevents us from fully seeing the whole picture of what's happening on college campuses. And I also wanted to add that the higher ed environment, was designed for that more typical student body that Rada was describing early in her comments. And when we think of college students, again, we're thinking about that image of a typical college student that has reliable resources outside of themselves. We don't think about students holding down jobs. We don't think about students who have family responsibilities. And so really that cultural image of hunger and who is affected by hunger and food insecurity is another reason why we don't talk about it or recognize it on college campuses.
I think you guys have made some really, really interesting points. I'm curious as a follow-up, and I might start with Anna and Jamie on this. Do you feel like seeing kind of across firsthand at campuses and at campuses across the country respectively, has this issue gotten worse over the last couple of years, either due to the economic impact of the pandemic, inflation? Are you seeing it get worse?
We have seen a large increase at the LSU food pantry of students using for the first time, coming and shopping with us. We've also had supply chain issues where we haven't been able to get as much food, so we're having to recently restrict a little bit more what we're able to give to our students, or restricting them to only visiting once a week instead of twice a week, which is what we prefer. And we've almost doubled in our number of visits per week in the past since the pandemic. Luckily, we've had a bunch of very generous donors to help out, but we have definitely seen a large increase of student users.
To build off of that, thank you, Anna. It is a nationwide growing concern. COVID really introduced this concept to campuses that basic needs were required in order to achieve higher education goals. And it escalated, of course, through these inflation elements that we're seeing. You mentioned this, eggs went up 350%. That was one of the highest commodities that we saw that increased. So we had these different elements, and what we're seeing from our student surveys and our campus survey reports across the country is that students need to access the pantry or the on-campus food solutions more frequently than they have in the past. There's not a lot of data historically to track that against or do a trend analysis for previous years. But year over year for the last 3-4 years, we are seeing that increase.
With this obviously very significant need, I think it's really important to understand the impact that food insecurity and even hunger is having on college students and why this presents such an equity issue. I'd be curious, is there any research, either empirical or quantifiable, that illustrates the impact of hunger on students, whether it's academic achievement, student engagement, graduation rates, or longer term on the implication of long-term student success, what their families are seeing in the future? I see Jess nodding, so I might start with you and then encourage others to build on there too.
Yeah, there is definitely a growing body of literature and research that documents both quantitatively and qualitatively the scope of the problem and the impact that food insecurity and hunger have on college students. And so, as you mentioned, it can range from, impacting student success as reflected in their GPAs. And it could also affect their completion rates. Are they staying in school and are they completing school, right? And this is connected to also literature in like finance and economics, right? The impacts that not completing school, right? Like starting a higher ed program, perhaps taking out student loans to do that, or foregoing working years and the opportunity costs associated with that, and the financial and economic impacts that not completing your education has over the long term. right? There's also mental health issues, physical health issues. So for example, students who are facing hunger or food insecurity may substitute the food that they're eating. So instead of having a high nutrient dense, high quality diet, they might substitute foods that don't provide as much quality or as much nutrients, but it's food that they can afford. And so you have both short-term and long-term physical impacts that are related to hunger and food insecurity. And I do want to direct folks to a health affairs article that was published this January, so January 2022. I would drop the link, but I go through a proxy, and so that will mess folks up. But it's called Food Insecurity on College Campuses, the Invisible Epidemic. And it really highlights the issue. It also shares some research studies that show not only the impacts that I mentioned, but also talks about the scope of the problem as well. And so if you're interested in the research side, that's a great resource to start with.
And I think if I can just add to what Jess had just said, there's the very real examples, which so many college students are facing every day. There's the choice between staying in school, or having the opportunity to make a few $100s more one evening or over the course of a few evenings, and they drop out of school or drop out of a course because of that. And so these are some very real implications, and when you drop out, it's that much harder to get back in, if you will, and to be able to engage and prolong your education. So there are those kinds of immediate short-term effects. You've tried so hard, you've managed to get in, and then you've got this very immediate need, whether it's for food, shelter, anything else, and it could be because of an emergency medical, issue or something else, and so you have to drop out, to be able to meet that need. I think from a longer term perspective, we all see inequities in every city, across the United States, and some more so than others. And when you've got individuals who are forced to drop out for one reason or another, and then their pathway ahead is through minimum wage jobs, sometimes intermittent minimum wage jobs, and that pathway does not lead to financial sustainability in the long run. Whereas if they had the ability to stay in school and to be able to get the certifications and the qualifications that allow them to earn living wage jobs, that puts them on a completely different trajectory. So you can see how this issue of not having enough to address your cost of living while you're in college really has long-term implications for the individual and could have intergenerational implications for their families as well.
Yeah.
Thank you for calling that in, Radha.
Jamie, did you want to add anything else there?
I'll give space for Anna. I just wanted to give a +1 to Radha for saying that. We've got this intergenerational inequity happening, and food and housing is a large portion of that need.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to touch on a little bit of what everyone has kind of said, that, students are typically buying or kind of put into a box of having to buy the cheapest options, not always the healthiest options. And then that really does, not always, it can affect their studying, their sleeping, their long-term effects, because nutrition is such a important part of mental and physical health that it can really affect, graduation rates, GPA, all things like that. As well as with prices rising, it's hard to choose between, do you buy food? Do you pay for your electricity bill? Do you pay your student loan debts? Like, what are you supposed to put your money towards? So then programs like school food pantries or Swipe Out Hunger or anything that college campuses can do to kind of alleviate the burden of food insecurity on students, to kind of allow them to focus on their studies and not have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to get through the day.
I think you all have really driven home that this is at each stage. It's the decision on whether they can attend college to begin with, or whether needing to work to afford food has to come first as a need. And then once you get there, the college experience. Are you able to participate in those extracurriculars and make those long-term relationship building moments that do come back to, impact job opportunities moving forward. And then if you have to drop out early, you're still seeing debt for generations. So I feel like you've really touched on it being at every moment along the way. I really want to turn towards some of the solutions, because I feel like that is a really the meat of this conversation. And I want to hear from you all. College campuses, I think, have had a long history of galvanizing social justice movements. We have, from the anti-war rallies to the critical role of student groups in the civil rights movement, more recently, the living wage movement, Black Lives Matter. And I really don't think that the food justice movement is an exception. I know that students all across the country are taking this crisis into their own hands. They're coming up with really innovative solutions to address hunger on campus. I want to hear a little bit about that and what's working. And I think you're the natural start here. I'd love to hear what you're seeing firsthand at your school.
I think the biggest thing that at Louisiana State University has been kind of pushing is getting rid of the, I'm going to forget the word, kind of the embarrassment that some students feel utilizing like a school food pantry, by opening up conversation and just being honest about it, not, using the joking stereotype of the broke college student, that this is a real epidemic. It's affecting students, it's affecting grades, it's affecting their day-to-day lives and how they interact with other people. So I think LSU's done a really good job of kind of trying to reduce that stigma of students using the food pantry, trying to make it as open and just as a normal shopping experience as possible, trying to learn students' names when they come in, talk to them about their day, their research that they're possibly doing for their graduate work. If they are a non-traditional student and they have, children or families of some sort that they're providing for, trying to, memorize that to make it just feel as comfortable as possible, as well as just making it very student focused, letting students share their stories, letting students kind of express their needs and what foods would be most helpful for them, and just catering to as much towards the students as possible.
I'm so glad you brought up the stigma piece. I think we see that, starting with elementary school and school breakfast and lunch programs, ranging to college, and then even as folks get older with the SNAP program. And really glad to hear that's something you all are addressing head on. Jamie, I'd love to hear what you're seeing through Swipe Out Hunger, kind of at a macro level across the board, and what some of the initiatives that you're the most excited about are.
People like Anna are sweeping the nation. I mean, providing these on-campus solutions, people are hungry today. How do we address that need today? So these on-campus pantries, the meal swipe program, those are really beneficial for folks today. The other element that we're seeing, and it really just energizes me to no end, is students stepping forward and having those conversations with their legislator and saying, this is a growing problem. We are your constituents. How are you supporting our institution and our campus to ensure that we have the basic needs possible, available, accessible to be successful in higher education? So some of the states that the Hunger-Free Campus Bill has already been moved in is states like Pennsylvania. That just happened earlier this year. We've got a lot of other states that are really interested. It's passed in 7, and we've got it introduced in 8 more. But these are really students leading the conversation. Swipe is there to act as a connector and a motivator and encourager. These students stepping forward and leading these legislators down the path of advocacy is phenomenal. These on-campus solutions, though, are critical for today. So I don't want to play down those support services.
And I think to add to Jamie's point, so much, and to Anna's point as well, so much of this is arising from students, and that's why it's powerful, and that's why it's effective, and that's why it actually works. It's one thing for others to out of good intentions, determine what might be appropriate, but we've done a lot of that, and it has failed over time. So I think with students like Anna and others, sort of taking matters into their own hands, and determining what's the best way to execute a program that does minimize the stigma, does make it more of an all of campus approach, And as Jamie said, there's the distribution angle, there's the advocacy angle. We're also seeing just so many different ways that different programs and schools can get engaged. Is the business and management program thinking about, small, medium entrepreneur angles with, food sales and distribution in food desert communities around our country. Those in the law program, government programs, thinking about it from their perspective, from policy. So, and obviously nutrition, as well as those in the ag space. So I think the more one makes it an all of campus approach where people feel they've got their own 2 cents and contributions to be able to make, it makes it that much more effective. The one other thing I'll highlight, given what Anna has said about non-traditional students, and we're seeing that those who are older adults back in college, they're attending a class and then they've got to jump, to go to work or to pick up their kids at childcare. So even though we're providing food, sometimes it needs to be home delivered, in order for it to get there and be fresh, and they don't have to cart it along, on bus or train or things like that. And so we're excited about programs like that we're engaging with colleges in our area, in the greater Washington area. And it's a partnership to understand the students and their needs, and to be able to ensure that you're not imposing more of a burden by trying to help, but actually making it easier and getting it delivered to their homes.
And I would just like to add one more thing for comments that Anna and Jamie made. American University students are very engaged in policy and the policymaking process. And that's actually one of the reasons a lot of AU students, come to campus. But one thing that hasn't been mentioned yet is just normalizing the conversation by bringing this up in class discussions. And one thing that I have seen increasing over time is people talking about this in class or writing papers about it, doing their own research around it. So at a very micro level, these kinds of in-class activities or discussions is really helping to destigmatize hunger and food insecurity on campus. And it's also increasing awareness about it for other students.
Something, if I could just touch on really fast, kind of regarding that. I've had a few classes where I've given presentations on food insecurity, and you have students that have never heard that word before and they're not sure what a food desert is, and then they think about it and they're like, I think I possibly grew up in a food desert, or my family was food insecure and they didn't realize that. And it's very eye-opening to them, for them to kind of realize that that's something that's been so normalized or so hushed down that they're not supposed to talk about, that it's just supposed to be kind of glossed over, that when you bring to their attention, they realize that it's an issue and it's an issue worth talking about. And I think if we had more classes, especially early on, maybe for 1000 level traditional classes, like early on freshman year or first classes college students are going into, explaining the resources on campus, signs to look out for within classmates and friends, things like that, so that it can be a community issue and we can work on building a solution together, I think is very important.
I know you dropped the link in the chat on the Hunger Free Campus, but I'd be interested in hearing just briefly what that looks like as an initiative, and if there are things that folks who are listening can do to learn and support that.
Sure. I might have to ask the host to reshare that link. Apologies. The Hunger Free Campus bill is a little bit different state by state. As we all know, we've got a lot of diversity in our states. For example, the SNAP work regulation kind of materializes differently state by state. For example, in Oregon, you can state the future employment and you can receive SNAP benefits as a college student, whereas in other states like Idaho, where I'm at, the work regulation is really fairly strict for college students. We also have variance in access based on geographic location, accessibility to other pantries, et cetera. But the Hunger Free Campus bill overall is set in the state budget. So we encourage legislators to introduce it as an initiative and set aside funds. So there is a fiscal impact to this bill that says, yes, we recognize that hunger on campus is a real issue. We need funds in order to address on-campus solutions. And we're going to set aside dollars by campus to ensure that that campus can address it in the way that's best for them. So for some campuses, that could be hiring a pantry coordinator or a host of coordinators to ensure that there's accessibility and open hours. It could be dollars set aside to purchase food. Some of our schools are purchasing at grocery store retail costs, and that can be really pricey when you've got thousands of students accessing your pantry on a regular basis. So again, it materializes differently state by state, but essentially it's calling it in on the state budget and setting aside those dollars committed to on-campus solutions.
Thank you so much for outlining that. The other piece of this that I'm just hearing is that universities and colleges exist not in a silo, but as part of a larger community. And I'm really curious if any of you all have examples of how your college or university or one that you've worked with is working with the wider community, either on directly addressing hunger on campus or from a policy standpoint to advocate for some of these pieces of legislation and policies that you've talked about.
I'm happy to kick it off, but there's more knowledgeable folks on this call. I'm also an adjunct professor at Boise State, and the campus pantry there has exploded. It is so beautiful and wonderful. And they're really, shout out to Emily Hester and Michelle Kane, who are there running the show. They've turned it from a pretty small facility with ready to eat convenience items, those items that Anna was describing, those grab and go type things that may not be nutritionally dense, but fill your belly, right? To a produce and protein and refrigerated items. But now they're also moving into this basic needs hub space where they have a referral channel so that students can get access to affordable housing, to mental health opportunities, to medical, to clothing, to hygiene items. It's truly phenomenal. And they've done that in a very short amount of time. So to see the great work at Boise State has been really inspiring. On an advocacy level, there's too many to even list. Right now in Florida, we have some wonderful folks doing communications and coordinating pantry visits so that legislators can put their eyes on the services and better understand what this accessibility looks like from a college student perspective, and advocating on a national level. It's really, really beautiful. But I'm sure Anna, Jessica, you all have seen other opportunities.
Yeah, on the state of Louisiana, we have a lot of really great donors that have really helped allow the LSU food pantry to flourish just in my time here. Before I got here, it was a small, essentially closet with some canned food items that, you could request based on need, and you'd have to set up a meeting to come and get it. And it wasn't very convenient or student focused. And then it kind of developed into a larger building. And now we are down on the first floor of our LSU Student Union. We get donations from local grocery stores, from Trader Joe's, from local restaurants that are donating pizzas for lunch, which aren't maybe not the healthiest, but is a good lunch option for students who don't have, are on campus all day and don't have the resources to hold their own lunch or go purchase a $12 to $20 lunch in the student union. So that's been really great. And we've also worked with the Greater Baton Rouge Food Bank, who have been incredibly helpful and incredibly supportive to us, working to get healthy produce and healthy options for our students. Because it's easy for them, well, not easy, I don't want to say that, but it is much easier to get unhealthy food, quick, cheap ramen, things like that. And it's a lot harder for them to get milk, eggs, especially with those prices increasing, fresh produce. So they have been very, very helpful to get necessary things for students to save on their grocery bills.
And Anna's touching on the partnerships that college campuses have with food banks around the country, and it's really a growing movement, I would say, and it's certainly something that we do at the Capital Area Food Bank for the Greater Washington area. We are so pleased to have partnerships with many of the local colleges across the region, and we're really looking at tailoring those to meet the needs of the students at each of these colleges. So for a few examples, in Northern Virginia Community College, there's a rich diversity of students from, incredibly wonderful ethnic and racial backgrounds. And so we don't want to provide just one set of items and food because everyone has a different, sort of dietary palette and things like that. And so we understand sort of who the students are, what they need, and then we source culturally appropriate food as much as possible to be able to distribute. And as Anna is saying, I think it's the protein, it's the produce, the fresh fruits and vegetables that are expensive and in demand. And that's what we try to provide more of. We're also conscious of, those who have dependents, sometimes children, sometimes seniors living with them, and to source food that's appropriate for the whole family, because we know if it's just for the student, they're not going to eat it. They're going to give it to, their dependents. And so being able to provide it for the whole family is another critical part of what we do. And I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's harder for the student to take all of that back with them. And so home delivery is something we offer when it is the most convenient way for that student and family to be able to get their food. So those are some of the types of things that we're doing. On the advocacy front, I agree with Jamie, and I think they have done an amazing job in supporting all the advocacy needs for students across the country. We work very well and closely with our consortium of colleges and universities in the area, and in fact just hosted a college hunger conference just a couple of weeks ago. And there are many advocacy actions that came out of that. And as we all know, we're stronger when we advocate together. And that's what's exciting for us. It's students, presidents, the consortium, food banks coming together. That's a pretty powerful combo.
I have to give you another one up there, Rada. That partnership between the on-campus pantry and their local food bank is so critical to accessing nutritious, culturally diverse, or traditional foods that can really feed the whole family. And if a college campus hasn't built that partnership yet, I really encourage them to do so, because paying those grocery prices is just not sustainable. And I'm hoping that that's where states will elevate this conversation as well.
Yeah, Jamie stole my thunder. I was going to say that exact thing, but thank you for articulating that so well. The only thing that I would add is what I'm seeing at American is a broader community effort to, again, not only destigmatize and normalize the conversations, but also to teaching folks what they themselves can do. Right. And so we know that food insecurity and hunger are the results of big systemic issues. Right. But there are steps that folks can take today, as Jamie talked about earlier in our conversation, such as donating foods. Right. And so all throughout campus, there are different sites where students can leave non-perishable goods or other things that the food pantry has listed as needs. And so not just having one place to donate, right? Just making it a whole campus effort from the students all the way up to the president has been one way that I've seen the AU community come together to address this issue.
And if we're talking magic wands, we need to lift that work regulation for SNAP benefits. I have to call it out. SNAP stands for supplemental. It's not there to be the end all, but we know Feeding America put out a great study that SNAP benefits can provide more meals per household or individual than 3 times as many food pantries. So how are we getting college students access to that benefit that allows them choice at the grocery store?
And this is the
on my
time to
soapbox.
do it. This is the time to do it. So even if Jamie's stepping off her soapbox, I'm stepping on it. This is definitely the time. We, all are aware that the White House had a food, hunger, and nutrition conference a couple of weeks ago. A lot of conversation around eligibility for federal government programs and how those need to be expanded. And certainly pertaining to our conversation today, how students, college students need to be beneficiaries as well. And there are various regulations now that don't allow them to participate in the program, depending on whether you're a part-time, full-time, student, et cetera, and the work requirements that Jamie just mentioned. But this is the time, I think, to be able to sort of get together and advocate for greater inclusion, and to just make it easier to navigate that whole program and to be able to get access. These are programs that are meant to benefit those who need the support, but unintentionally or intentionally, they've been made very difficult to access. And so we need to break down those barriers to access that can enable increased utilization.
And Radha, you really teed me up well, because I wanted to make sure that we talked about SNAP in this conversation, and just to think about the barriers for college students when they're trying to enroll in SNAP. You know, if we think about just food and nutrition assistance programs in general, you know, on average, about 50% of those who are eligible participate and receive their benefits. But when we look at like pre-pandemic data, among college students who are eligible for SNAP, only about 31% of those actually received and participated in a program. And so in addition to thinking about expanding eligibility or even making permanent those temporary exemptions or expansions that we saw in response to COVID, we also have to think about how do we tackle the barriers to enrollment, the barriers that we see around knowledge about eligibility, and ensuring that we get that 31% number up.
We talked earlier a little bit about how, you know, first generation college students can be disproportionately impacted. A couple of other populations we haven't touched on are graduate students and international students. You can see higher rates of food insecurity and going through college and university. I'm curious if you have anything to share on the factors that lead to that, and more importantly, some of the considerations that are being taken into account to address it from either a policy standpoint or, I mean, I did hear Radha talk about, you know, culturally appropriate meals. I've heard kind of what we're doing to help out with students who may have dependents. Anything else to kind of build on that, thinking about populations who may be most vulnerable here?
Something I've seen and kind of noticed early on in my days in the LSU food pantry was the disproportionate amount of graduate students that we do see as opposed to undergraduate students utilizing our food pantry. And I don't know every cause for that, but from what I've heard and the stories I've heard is it's essentially, or a main reason is the work that goes into a graduate program. The hours in the lab doing research, trying to get to that point, if they're trying to obtain their doctorate, getting in their theses, things like that, having to work unpaid internships to get towards that, so they don't have as much time to work paid jobs, or they also have all their course load on top of that. Another big population we have seen is international students. Louisiana does have a great international program for its students, but sometimes it is a little more difficult for them to obtain jobs for various reasons from what I've heard, or they just don't know where to apply for jobs. And that's something that I think LSU can work on, is kind of when they do have these international students coming in, explaining resources that we do have on campus, explaining where to go for certain things, how to apply for certain things, and just how to make their experience as best as possible and kind of give them everything they need to succeed, instead of just kind of putting them in, you know, the big group of everybody when they might not know everything that's available to them, or are kind of put at a disadvantage without having the proper knowledge, I guess.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. I want to add to this question something that we had come in through the audience. If anyone wants to address this piece as well, can anyone speak to hunger on campuses that have a primarily minority population, thinking about HBCUs, Hispanic serving institutions, what the data looks like there, and any specific initiatives on those campuses?
You know, that's a great question. And unfortunately, I don't have any specific data points to address that question, but it does raise up the concern that I have about data, right? We don't have really a systematic way of collecting this form of data. You have different definitions of food insecurity and how people measure it. We don't have like a nationwide survey that collects data from every college or higher ed institution. And so I think that investing in data collection that really does emphasize, HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions, I think that will be very useful. So I'm glad that the person, thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We don't have specific data on HBCUs, but we do publish a hunger report every year for our region where we do break it down by race and ethnicity. And there's no question across the board and across ages that hunger disproportionately affects minority populations, African-American, Hispanic populations. So when you think about the vast majority of students at an HBCU, clearly they're coming from minority households, who in society are generally at the lower end of that equity scale, if you will, versus the higher end. So I think that that will certainly have a greater impact. And just the fact that students may not have that financial cushion and support that, that I mentioned right at the beginning, of our conversation, from families that perhaps have been hovering at the poverty line or even slightly above that for some time. So we have to understand that, and the fact that the equity gaps across race are huge, and so they disproportionately will affect those on HBCU campuses.
I'm happy to ask the host to reshare this link to our college campus food pantry survey. Demographic data is definitely something that we'd like to lean in a little bit more, and our survey that's being analyzed right now will hopefully have some of those points as well. So be sure to check out our website in the next month or two to access that information. Again, Radasari plus one, like we know the systems of inequity, and there's a lot of barriers that the system has created for historically Black colleges and universities to be really successful. I would just like to point to a wonderful example, Morgan State, who's doing some phenomenal work. And if anybody's looking to connect, we'd be happy to make that connection.
Another really interesting question we have from the audience. What is the role of universities themselves in addressing hunger? And how are they perpetuating hunger, and how can they be part of the solution?
Just going to throw it in there really quick. Negotiate your contract with your food vendor, right? We've got really generous vendors like Sodexo and Aramark that are interested in providing free meals, whether it's scholarship or meal swipes. Talk about it with them, right? And I think the institution's role is to have a successful graduation rate. So providing basic needs should absolutely be one of their priorities, but opinion, obviously biased.
I think I would like to pick up on something that Anna said earlier about the role that colleges play once students have been admitted, whether they're undergraduate or for graduate programs. There's one thing to admit them and talk about your terrific diversity and rates of, first gen students, et cetera. But how are you helping them through the process so that they can get everything that the university has to offer, including basic support services, so that they graduate into jobs that are, graduate and get jobs that are highly desirable ones that help them get out of their intergenerational cycle of poverty. There's a critical role that colleges play in ensuring more inclusive economic growth across our country and in our communities. So colleges have the ability to help individuals get to a point where we can close the equity gap with the support they provide. And if they don't provide that support, they are only perpetuating it because you've accepted students but not allowed them to benefit from your program and get into those, get the skills and jobs that will help them participate in economic growth. So I think there's a crucial role that they play, and it comes down to the support while the students are on campus.
To build upon that, I think the university definitely plays a role in addressing the whole student. It's not just about academics. It's not just about workforce preparedness, right? All of that includes, the whole student development. I think the university also plays a role in understanding what students are going through. And so I would encourage universities to listen to their students and to learn from them, to understand what's happening on the ground, right? Food issues aren't just about, oh, we have a meal plan, or how much does that meal plan cost and how many students are using it? It goes beyond that. Additionally, I would encourage folks in universities and institutions of higher ed to understand that the college experience is not in a vacuum. Folks bring a lot with them and they experience a lot when they come to the university, whether or not they're living on or off campus. So just to remember that the college environment doesn't exist in a vacuum.
I think as we
Such a good
talked about,
point.
sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Anna, go ahead.
I think as Jessica said earlier, there just needs to be more research about college food insecurity and how that affects dropout rates or GPA. And I think once we have more of that research, we could bring it to universities and show them graduation rates could increase if you focus more of your efforts and more of your monetary donations and more of the money that comes in through SEC football, which is a huge thing down here, things like that. We could look into that and show your graduation rates will increase, and then your students will have greater success, which will then increase, how many students want to come because they see all the great outcomes of future students. So it would just be putting money back into the school, but it would, exponentially help the school and the students in the long term. But I think it's showing them that research of how much better and how much more we could help students if we funnel that money in now.
I want to add something because I think we have an amazing example of this on this call, and that is recruiting and educating the next generation of food justice advocates. I think we've seen a huge explosion in and research institutes and opportunities for students to have, experience in the communities studying these issues, and most importantly, drive them. And the student leadership, and Anna, you are such a strong example of this, to be kind of this front voice on, food justice and advocacy on campus, and then recruit other students, because there's nothing more, I remember being there's nothing more persuasive than your peers and folks speaking on this. So I think that's a really important add, and just feel honored that we can showcase that on this panel too. Thank you, Anna. So I want to ask another question. I think, we touched in the beginning about how much this program has, how much hunger and food insecurity on campus has exploded in recent years. And that can be a little bit disconcerting, but I'm also hearing from each of you words like expanded and evolved and exploded, and all the growth of both people thinking about it and initiatives that are underway that weren't before, and considerations and all the amazing brains on this. And that makes me really hopeful. And I want to actually hear from each of you, if we can, what about this makes you hopeful, and what you might say to folks listening to kind of inspire hope or even action.
I can get started with this. So something really great that I've seen, it's actually happening right now, is LSU is in its homecoming week, and we have reached out to Ole Miss, who we're playing for our homecoming game, and we've created a joint battle of the cans and are currently raising donations, either monetary or physical non-perishables, between both campuses, which I think is just a great thing. They have a wonderful food pantry over in Ole Miss, and they have been so helpful. It's completely student run over there. They do a really, really great job, and Louisiana and Mississippi are some of the most food insecure states in the nation. And so it's just really wonderful seeing so many students, not even just on my campus, but on other campuses, really trying to help their fellow students and bring awareness to this issue, and not being embarrassed or letting it stigmatize certain students, and just being very open with the discussion, you know, and not hiding it, and just being very open and looking for change and fighting for change. I think it's very inspirational.
Yeah, I was going to say it's students like Anna that really give me hope. And as I mentioned earlier, I see it in my own classroom. You know, students bringing up the issue, students deciding to talk about it openly in class, even their own personal experiences, both on and off campus. I'm also encouraged by the increase in research that I've seen. You know, I mentioned earlier, yes, you know, the data might not be that great, or might not represent, you know, the national picture. However, if you go on Google Scholar, you'll see a growth in the research that focuses on hunger and food insecurity on college campuses. So to me, that's saying that people are interested, they are dedicated to ensuring that we have the data that we need to make, you know, policy change at all levels. And hopefully funders will follow this trend and start to fund more research and interventions that address this problem.
I would add to what both Anna and Jess have said. I think as awful as this whole COVID experience has been, it has highlighted and this issue of hunger broadly across our community, and certainly more about college food insecurity as well. So an issue that was invisible before has become at least slightly more visible during the course of the pandemic. So I would say what has me hopeful is that this visibility has created so many partnerships, some traditional, some non-traditional, of different individuals, you know, within college campuses, different organizations who haven't traditionally partnered together, starting to partner together to address this issue, because it is eminently addressable. As we all know, it is not a lack of food in the country. You know, there's plenty of that. It is just really kind of ensuring a fit between those who need it and the sources of food that we have. So that gives me great hope. The types of partnerships that are being discussed and being enacted on, and certainly at the federal level with the White House conference that just took place, and with some inclusion of the needs of students, the time is now to be able to act on it. And so thank you for the webinar and for shedding, you know, even further light on this issue.
Everything everyone said, centering that student voice, they recognize that they are in a position of authority and subject matter expertise, and they are using their voice. And I am so thrilled about that. So get ready for change, because the students are coming. But the other aspect is that this is a bipartisan issue. We have had folks on both sides of the aisle reach out, interested in this policy and in this work on a state level. And I think that's really exciting, because to Radha's point, it does, you know, lend to the national conversation, and hopefully we can get some additional changes there.
Yeah, thank you all. I think that I echo everything you said. I think that there's so many reasons to be hopeful. And I hope everyone joining us is getting that here too. The other piece I would love to hear an opportunity to kind of add to, I know you all have put some links in the chat, but are there any other just key takeaway, one thing you want folks to know or do coming out of this call?
Well, on a broad, you know, big picture kind of view, I want folks to leave this call understanding that hunger doesn't look like what you think it does. And that framing that image of hunger, again, really limits us from seeing the full picture. So I would encourage folks on this call to really re-examine their assumptions and their picture around hunger and food insecurity.
And I think on an advocacy front, there are actions we can all take, and we can influence our own congressional leaders to be able to take this action. Jamie's right. This should be a nonpartisan issue or bipartisan issue, you know, and one that we can get agreement on. And in some cases, we do have the supporters, but not in every instance. And it will only help if more of our elected officials are supportive of, you know, enhancing utilization of SNAP, increasing increasing eligibility, the hunger-free campus bill. I mean, all of these things are things that can make a difference. And we know that legislators, act on behalf of their constituents. So in that sense, we can all make a difference.
And I'm going to make you go last because you're the most important voice in my mind. I want you to have that lasting impact. I got to do a plug, right? Like if you are a student or a campus that is looking to explore how to alleviate hunger in your community and space, I hope that you reach out to our team at Swipe Out Hunger, whether that's on the advocacy front or it's building your pantry or doing a meal swipe drive or any other level of program or project you're looking for. Reach out to us so that we can help you navigate those next steps.
I think my main part or my main takeaway that I would hope people get is to just have open and honest conversations about food insecurity. It is, like we've said before, there are a lot of predetermining factors that can cause or lead to food insecurity. It's shouldn't be something that we're embarrassed about. It's a basic necessity that everyone should have access to, and everyone should have access to healthy food. It shouldn't just be one type of food or just what you can afford at that moment. It should be all types of food. And so I think that's something that's really important. And something that I would like to just also add is there is a project called the Farm Link Project. It's a nonprofit organization that was started by college students. It's a really wonderful project. They also employ a lot of college students. Their main purpose is to reduce food waste and connect it to food insecure communities or locations, organizations, things like that. And they've done a tremendous job saving rescuing a lot of food, giving it to people who suffer from food insecurity or are in food deserts. And they've also done a tremendous impact on what food waste does to the environment. So they have done a lot with carbon emissions and try and reduce that as much as possible. So I would suggest looking into that and seeing if you could support them or bolster them in some way.
Well, I know we are just about at time here, and I want to give Elliot time to wrap up, but I also just want to say first, thank you. It was such an honor to share this space with all of you, leaving with so many things I want to follow up on, so much inspiration, and just want to thank all of you for sharing your time with us today. So Elliot, I am going to hand it over to you to wrap us up and let us know what to do next, but thank you.
Yes, I want to echo first, Joanna, thank you for your beautiful moderation in this conversation. Anna, Rada, Jessica, Jamie, thank you so much for your work and for being a part of this conversation, and everybody that was on this call. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of today's very important discussion. If you want to dig a little bit deeper and reflect on what we just heard, we're going to take a break for about 3 minutes and jump right on. Dr. Jessica Young will join me, and Katie Workman, Share Our Strength Leadership Council member. And we'll take a few minutes just to reflect on what we just heard. We'll share the recording shortly, so please share that with your network. We'll also have a summary to action report, which will include a lot of the resources that we talked about today. One quick flag, and to mark your calendars for November 18th, we're going to do our first Conversation on Food Justice live session that will be at the Aspen Institute headquarters in Washington, D.C. We'll stream it as we always do via Zoom, but we're also going to have a hybrid version where we'll be in person. And so if you are in the D.C. area, please join us on November 18th. More details to come. We'll be sharing invitation and more details very soon. So thanks again for all of you for joining us today. We'll start the fireside chat in about 3 minutes. You can stay right on. You can stay right on this link, and we'll be in touch very soon. Thanks, everybody, and take care.